Okay, good morning, esteemed panel members, classmates, and guests. My name is Sofia de Wit. Today I will be presenting on my research project entitled An 8-Year Retrospective on the South China Sea Arbitration Ruling, Addressing China's Actions Through Transparency. My project aims to illuminate the increasing instability in the region and provide context for those unfamiliar with the topic. In this presentation, I will cover what defines the South China Sea, in addition to the arbitration itself, and in addition to the initiative I researched in my paper named Sea Light. As we go through, please feel free to know any questions you may have. I'm very excited to answer them later on. The South China Sea is situated in the southeast region of Asia, is bordered by 9 countries: Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, China, and Taiwan. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, it encompasses an area of 1,223,000 square miles. Although it is considered to be relatively small compared to other bodies of water in the ocean, it is strategically important due to its location. With the Strait of Malacca in the southwest and the Strait of Taiwan in the northeast, it serves as a critical shipping route, with a significant portion of the world's maritime trade passing through its waters. The United Nations Trade and Development Organization reported that in 2022 alone, 64% of total goods discharged worldwide traverse through the region. Additionally, it is estimated that the South China Sea contains 11 billion barrels of untapped oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Being rich in natural resources has played a vital role in the dispute. So to provide some perspective, Exxon, one of the largest publicly traded international petrochemical companies, made 3 new discoveries in the the Southern American country of Guyana, and increased its estimate of recoverable resource for the Stabroek Broke to nearly 11 billion oil equivalent barrels, so that alone was equivalent to $1 trillion. Moreover, the South China Sea is crucial for the livelihoods of about 3.7 million people who rely fishing on these waters. The region alone counts for 12% of the global fish catch, as reported by the Center of Strategic and International Studies. With one of the highest levels of marine biodiversity in the world, the sea boasts over 6,500 maritime species. Taking these factors into account, the People's Republic of China has quickly made itself playing a major prominent actor in the region. The term gray zone tactics has repeatedly been used to describe China's strategic use of its Coast Guard and fishing fleets by experts worldwide to incrementally assert control over the South China Sea. This approach emphasizes non-military assertions, employing actions such as blockades and harassments that remain just below the threshold of conventional warfare. These measures are designed to disrupt the activities of other states, compelling them to align with Beijing's domestic, economic, foreign policy, and security objectives, all while minimizing the risk of backlash or outright conflict. Examples include the use of bow crossing, blocking, swarming, rafting, cable cutting, ramming, water cannoning, going dark, spoofing, laser dazzling, over-the-horizon hiding, intrusive patrolling, and pretext to escalate. This all has been put in place to reinforce the 9-dash line, also known as the 11-dash line, or the U-shaped line, or even the dotted line. A demarcation line visualized on maps by the PRC. Its look is distinct. As seen on the map projected, these 9 dashes go from Taiwan, pass by the Philippines, to Brunei, Malaysia, and finish off in Vietnam. The first 9-dash line is widely reported by scholars and commentators to predate the existence of the PRC itself, having been published by the nationalist government of the Republic of China, also known as the Kuomintang, in 1947. Since the dashes have no standardized coordinates, it remains uncertain whether China is claiming exclusively the land territory or within the 9-dash line or all the maritime space within it as well. China breaching the sovereign rights of neighboring ASEAN countries, which stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, countries wasn't anything new. As seen in maps of the 9-dash line, it's almost like there's zero acknowledgement of the other countries in the region. However, it wasn't until 2013 that the Philippines initiated proceedings for the South China Sea arbitration, the Republic of Philippines versus the People's Republic of China. Through this case, the Philippines aimed to declare whether China's claims based on the 9-dash lines are invalid under UNCLOS, which is the United Nations Convention's law on the sea, and declare whether certain land features in the South China Sea are rocks, islands, or low tide elevations, which would allow some territory around those islands for the countries neighboring, and declare whether China has interfered with the Philippines' right to exploit resources within the Philippines' claimed waters. So this also includes the 200 nautical mile EEZ, which is the exclusive economic zone. Because the Philippines decided to hammer on the legal status of disputed maritime features rather than determining the jurisdiction of these islands, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, which is a third-party court, international court, was able to determine that China's assertions of historic rights within the 9-dash line used by Beijing to define its claims in the South China Sea lacked legal basis. Additionally, it also found that Beijing's activities within the Philippines' 200 nautical mile EEZ, including illegal fishing and artificial island construction, which I will get onto later on, violated the Philippines' sovereign rights. By virtue of China's ratification of UNCLOS in 1996, China is legally bound by the tribunal's ruling, even if it's a third-party international court. So here I have a short video. So.
These two ships from the Chinese Coast Guard. And the ship they're targeting with high-powered water cannons is a Philippine supply vessel. An international court says the Philippines has the right to extract resources in these waters. China doesn't see it that way.
面对菲方船只的强行冲闯，中国海警不得不采取必要的执法措施。
It's the 6th time in 8 months this kind of incident has happened, and it's a growing problem for the world. The U.S. and the Philippines have a mutual defense treaty dating back to 1951, and the circumstances that may trigger U.S. involvement have become more clear recently.
Southeast Asian leaders are anxious over the prospect of a war between the U.S. and China, two partners that they depend on dearly.
Second Thomas Shoal is the most dangerous flashpoint today. This is truly a crisis waiting to happen.
While conducting research for my paper, one question that popped into my mind repeatedly was the possibility of a peaceful, fulfilling resolution. Alongside the help of my mentors, I eventually came across Ray Powell, the director of the program Sea Light. Started by a team of volunteers at Stanford's University Gordonian Knott Center for National Security Innovation, they aim to spotlight what happens at sea by filming and documenting every encounter. Similar to the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, these programs rely on the use of photographs and videos. So these are actually real images caught by the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, and as you can see, these islands have been taken over by the Chinese, and they are slowly building military bases and ports to essentially export people to expand their territory in this region. As you can see, the Spratly Islands are all the way down near Brunei and Malaysia, and China's all the way up there, but they're trying to get islands all the way over there. So this is a little bit closer, but technically this would be considered under Vietnam's exclusive economic zone, and they are still claiming sovereignty over this. And same with Subi Reef. Although the idea may seem simple, the impacts have been profound. With a follower count of almost 16,000, each of Powell's tweets reached thousands. For a country like the Philippines, where a majority of the population obtains their news from tertiary sources like social media, I believe these initiatives truly have the potential to take off. Thank you.
I'm going to begin, since this is a topic that, as you and I discussed earlier this morning, is a huge topic in human geography. UNCLOS and the UNCLOS provisions is a featured topic, and it's a complicated issue. And I think that one thing that would have helped, Sophia, if in this presentation you had gone over a little bit of the provisions of UNCLOS. And how that relates to the South China Sea conflict, how the respective parties to this conflict view what are considered territorial waters, EEZs, that acronym that you used, and what does that mean, and what are the actual provisions, and what happens when, in the case of the South China Sea, you have countries that are so close together that some of those provisos have to be modified. You have to have them, as you know, a medium line or some other form of sort of dividing up the goods. And this has become a big issue because everything under the sea is included in UNCLOS, so that the nations are able to mine the floors of the sea, which is becoming very, very important. There's oil, there's all sorts of minerals and other things that countries are interested in. And there's also huge fishing concerns for all of these countries. And so all these parties are players. And of course, China, there's a geopolitical issue here. China has played into the hands of certain ASEAN nations who tend to not raise too many flags about this issue, and then you've got the countries like Vietnam and the Philippines that are very aggrieved. And of course there's the right of free passage that the U.S. is insisting upon. But the U.S. is not a signatory to UNCLOS, which is something I think you probably would have wanted to talk about. That, when you're dealing with this issue, who is actually signed on this UN convention that determines how we navigate the open seas, and what are territorial waters, what rights do countries have to the waters that wash up onto their shore, how is that defined? It's really rather complicated, as you already know because you've taken the class. And I think that really plays into this conflict. And China has actively been building, as you know, manufactured islands. Besides just militarizing some of the islands that are already there, they have been creating islands with the intent of expanding their EEZ from those now man-made islands, which makes it, and you mentioned that China has been a member of UNCLOS since 1969. They're a signatory, but yet they violate it. The U.S. is not a signatory and yet is trying to enforce it. So therein lies part of the issue here. And the question becomes, where does this go? The U.S. right now does the freedom of the seas actions by sending, flotillas of heavily fortified ships through this area, as other nations have started to do as well. But depending on who you're speaking to in any given moment, this is a serious flashpoint where there's something really could happen that's rather dramatic between two nuclear capable countries like the U.S. and China. But it's also even a bigger issue in terms of the future of that strategic body of water and the sheer volume of goods that are transported. The amount of gas, oil, and goods is so huge that it has to have some sort of protocols. So when you did this paper, you argue that you're going to argue there's a solution. What is the solution, this bright light solution? I'm confused as to what that is.
So that's actually something that I stumbled across in the middle of my research. I realized that this topic is really so ambiguous because it could really end up with China even withdrawing from UNCLOS and the UN, which would be terrible in terms of ramifications. But really, as of right now, I don't really think there is any solution, which is something I had to work with this presentation. So I turned to rather increasing awareness and rather the global presence of this and calling upon other diplomatic countries to hold China accountable for this.
But the question is, the problem is that you only have about half of the ASEAN nations who are key players willing to upset, and even the ones that have an issue are worried on a diplomatic level of angering Beijing because of for economic reasons, and nor do they want to antagonize the United States. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. And so the question becomes, how does anyone have a proposal out there that would at least, it won't be a solution, because I know that there's a solution readily available, and by the way, conventions are only as good as they're enforced. And if China is a signatory but doesn't abide by the convention, it's like so many other things the UN does, what's the point? Did you come across any proposals in terms of how this might be adjudicated or resolved in a way that won't lead to war?
Well, it was recently the 8th anniversary of the arbitration, and across all of the statements that I came across from all of the countries that supported this ruling, even they had no straightforward plans going forward. They just called upon other countries to act upon, so I really have no idea where this could go in the next even 5-10 years. Yeah.
So you have an ICJ ruling that China ignores.
Yes.
And once again, we're in a precarious position to talk about that since we're not a member of the ICJ ourselves. Again, so the U.S. as the big gun in the area has got a problem because it's not a member, it has not signed on to a UNCLOS, and it is not a participant in the ICJ. So it can't really say that China needs to observe the ICJ ruling, but it doesn't observe ICJ rulings, and it can't talk about UNCLOS since it doesn't sign on to UNCLOS. All it can do is talk about freedom of navigation, and the way it imposes that is by sending flotillas of armed ships through these, and China protests these every time they do it. It always makes the news every time we do this, by the way. So I just don't, do you think that anyone has put forth any kind of initiative that would lead to a discussion or a compromise, a diplomatic solution to this problem?
I really don't think so. The biggest, I guess, global superpower that I've come across was Australia, and even they haven't been really doing much in recent times to
Well, they don't want to see China controlling the South China Sea either. I mean, it's not in their interest. They also do a lot of stuff for an island nation, so they're going to need this vital waterway. All right, I'll open up to other questions.
It's on.
Great job. I like the topic. I wonder if you can, similar to what I think Ms. Cooksey asked Addison Ronaldo, can you give us some background as to what led you to be interested? I know that you've lived in the Philippines, but could you speak more to what made you center in on this topic?
So the South China Sea has always piqued my interest ever since I even did an 8th grade project that was similar to this, but on a lesser scale in 8th grade. And practically back then I looked at more the ecological impacts of this entire dispute. And I guess more, I kind of want to go into international relations, and looking at disputes like this is going to be a major part moving forward, and I think that this was a perfect project to look into that.
When you lived in the Philippines, was there a lot of, would you say widespread awareness of the people, of this issue? Was it widely talked about? How did average people there consider this?
I feel like I don't really have the greatest say in saying that because I went to an international school and it was very much a bubble, and many of the kids didn't even realize that this was happening. So, yeah.
I would just say that the Philippines depends on who's in power, because under the previous president, he was trying to cozy up to Beijing and kind of put this issue on the back burner.
Mhm.
Now that Marcos is in power, this has
He's
become,
becoming-
and with these, thanks to the support, the military support, this promise that we made to the Philippines that we will bail them out of any situations that they get themselves into, he's getting a little bit more bombastic and a little bit more confrontational with Beijing. And so I think it really, we saw under Duarte a different approach. He was much more sympathetic to
Yes.
Beijing.
Yes.
And therefore, there was a cooling off over this issue. And that there seemed to be kind of I was gonna say a rapprochement, but there was a kind of, all right, we'll let you do we'll let your fishermen come in to these areas and we won't bother them. But now, of course, we're seeing incident
Yes.
after incident after incident, which again is concerning to people. So I think that's what I see in the current landscape of the Philippines.
Yes, and I think I even put a little bit about that in my paper because when President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. went to Washington, I think the other month, he talked to President Biden about the Mutual Defense Treaty and restating what the circumstances were in case a potential conflict were to happen. So I found that really interesting. Yes.
Question about the Quad and how they are probably going to maybe undermine China's growth in that area. Are you familiar with the Quad, 4 countries that are, doing this association to counter China? One of them is Australia, someone said. India is also part of it. And I think the 4th one is Japan.
Yeah.
So there's this collaboration between those 4 countries to kind of, there's always a containment levels, 1, 2, 3, I guess, for Chinese waters. So is the growth of Quad a thing that might counter growth of China in this region?
I came across a little bit of that during my research, but as of right now, they haven't really been doing anything. But I do think that they are most probable in case of a potential conflict. They're definitely going to be on the front lines because, I mean, countries like Vietnam and the Philippines, I don't think will do much. So, yeah.
Can you envision any scenarios where you think it might be in our interest to actually use force to counter what the Chinese are doing? Or do you think under just they can take over as many rocky islands as they want to, it would never be in our best interests?
There's a very fine line because then that also brings in the entire, situation with Taiwan and all this just region is a great slurry of disputes and trying to find a middle ground, and as of right now, it's not really doing that well.
I have a final question for you. As I think one lone AP seminar veteran here with ASP, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about was your process at ASP similar to anything from what you did your AP seminar, or did you find some places where you found some of the process overlapping, or was it entirely different?
I actually think it was kind of similar. I remember with our outline, we had to do, I think, 3 sources per paragraph, and I made sure that was at least a minimum requirement that I did for any of my body paragraphs. So I think that's something that stuck with me.
Anyone else? By the way, Taiwan would be another issue because, again, since I mentioned UCLOS and I mentioned ICJ, we have a one China policy, and yet we have a defensive pact with a country that we don't acknowledge as legitimate based on our own foreign policy. And so part of the problem with all of this is that the United States needs to clarify what its diplomatic position is on multiple fronts before it can assert any kind of military action. What is it that you are arguing, since you don't sign on to this protocol, you don't recognize this court, and you recognize Taiwan as being actually a part of the People's Republic of China by your own stated policy when we established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China? It's called the One China Act. And yet we have a defensive treaty where we're giving this country that doesn't exist high-end weapons. It would be like China sending Puerto Rico weapons. I mean, that's the equivalent of what we're
Yes.
talking about. And I just think that the waters that Taiwan claims, China looks at it that as that's Chinese territory.
Yes. Yes.
So there's no point, there's no conversation here. Once again, that complicates the issue, is the whole issue of Taiwan. And you know, you could have spun this conversation into probably a 2-hour conversation, because it really is very complicated.
Yes.
And certainly, for those who haven't taken, a student hasn't taken human geography, this would be a good way to learn something about this particular issue, because it is front and center
Yes.
in the news. Not only in this area, but other parts of the world. The seas are now very important, not only for for moving goods and services through on container ships, but also what's below the sea has become very important. And I'm sure if we had a marine biologist in the room, she would chime in on that front. Thank you,
Thank
Sofia,
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.